Hello and welcome, everyone. I can't tell if people are entering the room, but I believe you are. Hello, hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. As people are entering, we'll give a few minutes before we get started, and I'll do some ramblings as people do. My name is Wilfrida Edward, and I'm the Executive Director of CINDR, the Canadian Centre for Nonprofit Digital Resilience. I have the pleasure of being your moderator today. At CINDR, we believe that every charity and nonprofit in Canada should be able to use data and technology to effectively meet their missions and grow their impact. This mission is directly linked to today's conversation. So we'll be talking about unlocking digital skills for success and giving you solutions to empower your nonprofits. But first, a few housekeeping items. Closed captions are available and enabled for the entire webinar. We also have simultaneous interpretation in both French and English. I'll pass things over to Israel, who will walk us through a quick tutorial of how that works. Over to you, Israel.
Yeah, thank you. We have interpretation. You will find a button at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation. So please select the language that you would like to listen to. We have English and French. Thank you.
Thank you, Israel. Now, we also encourage you to use the chat function to introduce yourself or throughout the session if you need any technical support. You can also use the Q&A function that's found in Zoom at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions specifically to our panelists. At the end of the webinar, we'll take some time to answer the most pressing and popular questions at that time. Now, before we move to our amazing panelists for introductions and jump into the conversation, I'd like to take a few minutes to do a land acknowledgement. So with an acknowledgement that Imagine Canada's staff, operations work, and network depend on traditional Indigenous territories to provide us with physical space, sustenance, safety, and community to work, live, and play. Our physical head office is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Wyandot nations. We acknowledge that these lands are covered by Treaty 13 and the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. We acknowledge that these lands are still the home of many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. For myself, I'm joining from Ottawa on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. These peoples have had an enduring presence and stewardship of this land since time immemorial, and I am grateful to be able to live, work, and play here in ways that honor and uphold my shared responsibility to this land and its original caretakers. Now, just as we're encouraged to reflect on and express gratitude for these lands that we each reside on, we also invite you to take action by learning more about the First Nations principles of OCAP. That's ownership, control, access, and possession. In today's discussion, we'll talk a lot about data management, which is, if done effectively, should incorporate an understanding of data sovereignty. So these principles affirm the rights of First Nations to govern the collection, protection, use, and sharing of their data. They are foundational to respectful research, data governance, and Indigenous self-determination. So please take a moment to check out the OCAP website and learn how you can engage in this training. We'll make sure that that link is in the chat for you. Thank you. Now, last month, we released the final phase of the Future Proofing Community Workshop project. This project is a collaboration with many knowledgeable and dedicated partners, some of which are part of our panel today, including representatives from Imagine Canada, Digital Governance Council, Blueprint, and the DAIS. We're here to present the highlights of the research we've developed together and to discuss how we can leverage it to better prepare your organizations to navigate key digital challenges. The project itself was launched nearly a year and a half ago and was designed with a clear mission in mind. That is to simply equip nonprofits with the tools, the skills, and the confidence that they need to meet community needs in an increasingly digital world. We partnered with several organizations to examine the state of digital skills in Canada, and together we've designed practical prototypes to help nonprofits become more data and digitally savvy, and developed a set of recommendations based on what we've learned. Now, at the heart of this project is the Digital Skills Plus, or the DS Plus framework. It's a comprehensive approach that goes beyond digital literacy to integrate essential skills like communication, creativity, innovation, adaptability, and problem solving to reflect the real world demands that's faced by nonprofits. And our panelists will talk a little bit about that now. Moving over to our wonderful panelists, I'll pass things over to each of you to introduce yourself, starting with you, Viet.
Wonderful. Thanks, Wilfreda. I'm just going to quickly share the thing because I have the pleasure of being the first to go in. We had talked about me sort of presenting a slide with all the different logos. I don't think Cinda is on there, but just imagine Cinda existing in the background of Imagine, because I think that's that's how that works. But my name is Viet. I am currently the manager of economic research at the DAIS at Toronto Metropolitan University. And I had a wonderful pleasure of working with great friends and partners from Imagine Canada, Cinda, Blueprint, as well as the Digital Government Council, specifically on this project. And so our involvement with the project, I'll stop sharing now that the logo's on there, was also possible through funding from the federal government, specifically from Employment Social Development Canada. Hopefully its name will not be changing with the new minister and everything to jobs and families, but through the Skill for Success program. And so this program, this project really would not be possible without the support from the federal government. And so my involvement with this project was very much towards the beginning end of this, where ultimately through the conclusion of this project, we wanted actionable sort of tools that nonprofit organizations, when thinking about digitally upskilling themselves, can in fact use that ensures that it's working with the organizational constraints, that it is in fact useful for them. And so that had many stages to this project. And the stage in which I was most involved with is essentially the assumption validation stage. What is the current state of technical skills in the nonprofit sector? What are the kind of skills that are being demanded or being hired for? And what kind of talent that are currently working within the nonprofit sector that we can work with? And so we had ended up producing 2 pieces of studies that is specifically focused on the tech workers working within nonprofits, and then the current digital demand and skills demand, which then ended up with a number of sort of assumptions, which I'm sure we'll go into. But one key fact and acknowledgement of which is that often you all who are working in the nonprofit sector doesn't have the budget to hire dedicated technical talent, that you have to rely on existing internal resources and really internal digital champions who might be working in non-digital roles. And that, I think, ended up informing a lot of the work that some Blueprint folks at DGC did, which I'll be very excited to talk about. But with that, I'm passing it back to you, Wilfreda.
Thank you so much, Viet. That was great. With that, we'll move over to Max Palomar, Vice President of Data Capacity and Analytics at Blueprint.
Great. Thank you, Wilfreda and Viet. So as Wilfreda mentioned, I'm Max Palomar. I'm the VP of Data Capacity and Analytics at Blueprint. A little intro to Blueprint. We are a mission-driven nonprofit organization focused on using data and evidence to build better policies, programs, and communities across Canada. We're very excited to be involved in this project. And I think as Viet pointed out, we sort of picked up our work where the DAIS left off. So a lot of our initial work was research on table setting, on understanding both the specific needs for digital skills within the nonprofit sector and where the sector was facing challenges in terms of capacity to build those. From there, Blueprint also worked on prototyping and testing responses, so different scalable ways to actually be able to start building up digital capacity within the sector. So our second question was really focused around what features do responses around digital capacity really need? What should we consider in these models? And then finally, how do organizations actually experience these models? Can we build those that are helpful, and what do we have to think about to scale them and make them as effective as possible? So through our early research, we surveyed a large number of nonprofits across the country, asking about their digital skills capacities, their needs, what training and what opportunities they'd taken up to be able to build those capacities, and what might be next. We found out quite a lot from that process. Unsurprisingly, we found a really strong acknowledgement across the sector of the need and importance for digital skills. So over 80% of respondents sort of pointed to digital skills being critical to their day-to-day operations. But at the same time, I think there was an acknowledgement that there are some of these gaps that I think we had alluded to earlier. About half of the organizations that we talked to, even though the majority of them said that digital skills were important, also flagged that they felt like they were at the start of their digital skills development journey. We also found some specific areas sort of to dig in on in terms of where nonprofits may want to build digital capacity. One really key area where we saw the largest gaps between the expressed need, the importance that, both leaders and frontline staff were seeing, and where they felt like their skills actually was within the area of data capacity. Data management, privacy and security, and strategic decision-making is something really critical that needs to be built within the sector. At the same time, we also heard a lot about some of those constraints that Viet alluded to, where often sort of the top line challenge to a lot of organizations is the existence of funding for building digital capacity, and also just the availability of day-to-day resources to be able to build up infrastructure when so many folks are focused on delivering and achieving their core mandate. And also some real challenges about the complexity of the field in terms of the range of options that are available, how many different training or development opportunities exist, and be able to understand which specifically map to the needs of a given organization. So when we moved to the challenge of actually building responsive testing and prototype, we really tried to build these in. We wanted to build something that responded to the main needs we heard, but also some of the constraints. Our approach was to come up with a design that really focused on data processes within organizations that both spoke to that large data need we'd heard, and also focused on processes that were really day-to-day challenges that organizations would experience. So it was practical, it was applied in process. People taking this on, it wasn't a sort of abstract digital skills development journey, but really tackling something that was critical to how they operated. And what we really hoped for was something that was understandable, workable outside of the box, that would both improve this process, but also with the goal of helping the organization understand their data needs more broadly, their capacities, what the next steps might be for building up data capacity in a way that was really strategic and moved forward their impact. We applied this model with a few really, really helpful partners. Sampath is going to talk about sort of her and Skills for Change's experience with it in a moment. Heard some great feedback from it. It really sort of spoke to what some of our ambitions were, that by building these approaches that are lightweight, it seems like it really can produce effective and valuable digital skills capacity opportunities for nonprofits that aren't asking for a ton of ongoing resources, funding some of those real structural challenges we've run into. But at the same time, I think we have heard some concerns of it is tough to be able to build always the bandwidth, the focus within an organization to take on development opportunities like this while delivering core mandate. So I think we've made a lot of exciting ground, and we're focused on how do we learn and iterate to scale in the future. But there's both pieces we've learned so far, and I think some next steps we can talk to later about how we'll approach that. So with that, I'll pass it back to Wilfrida.
Wonderful. Thank you for that great overview. There's so much there to chew on and ask questions about. So thank you, Max. We'll move over to you, Sampath, to give your view and Skills for Change's experience.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for having me here. Really appreciate the opportunity to bring the nonprofit lens to this conversation. So once again, my name is Sampath Kukure, and I'm the Vice President of External Relations and Development at Skills for Change. And just a little bit about Skills for Change, just for context. We were founded in 1982, and we provide a full range of services, including immigration, settlement, workforce development, community building programs for newcomers, refugees, and underserved communities in Canada. We were originally a women's-focused organization, and we are grounded in our intersectional approaches to understanding a conjuncture between migration, employment, and inclusion. And over the last 43 years, years, we're now a national service organization that has played a major role in supporting settlement and integration and career development through learning and training opportunities aimed at enabling access to full participation in the workplace, both in a local and national context. So at the core, and just given this context of our national expansion, we really believe in holistic support, providing employment and training, mental health supports, mentorship, and now increasingly, of course, digital literacy and data capacity building for our staff and our clients and the sector. So when I was invited to participate in the Building Data Management Capacity Prototype, I really saw this as an opportunity for an operational exercise that could be expanded to support our data capture for the 16,000 clients that we serve per year and beyond, to really have that voice for the sector around this work. And so the prototype was an opportunity to reflect on this growing shift in our sector. And Max also did allude to this, where the data isn't just about compliance, which compliance is becoming such a huge component of the work that we do, but it's also about storytelling and equity and accountability of our programs and the services and the people that we serve. Nonprofits are increasingly being asked to prove our impact, often with limited time, budget, and tools to do so. So going through the prototype was like holding up a mirror to the organization. It gave us a structured way to break down the process step by step and to highlight the staff roles involved. So what data is collected, which tools can be used. And it wasn't just technical, it was strategic and very, very refreshing from my perspective. What I found most valuable about the prototype was how it simplified the overwhelming world of data and digital systems, especially for somebody like me that was leading this project and not as attuned to data management and data systems. So I felt that it broke down the complex process into really actionable steps and make it even more accessible for even those organizations that might not see themselves as quote unquote tech people, which is really crucial, especially in smaller nonprofits in Canada that often don't have a dedicated IT or data teams, and they're doing the work. The folks that are running the day-to-day operations are taking on this type of work. The step-by-step model allows anyone, regardless of digital fluency, to see how data fits into their everyday work and why it matters. So tools are very, very critical for our sector. Tools like this, they demystify what it means to be data informed and provide a realistic, human-centered path to better data practices. So it's not just about adopting a fancy CRM overnight. It's about building shared understanding of processes, strengthening collaboration, and supporting better decisions with data that we already have. This is the thing, is that our sector has so much important and gathers so much history of data. It's just a matter of how do we organize it so that we can, share that story and better tell that story. I do want to also say that there are some challenges that so many nonprofits face, and we faced in this project as well, which is capacity. We went through some iterations of who might be able to be involved in testing the prototype, and just due to capacity, that kind of took a little bit longer for us to determine. And even with the best tools and templates, carving out the time for new processes, especially when a lot of the times nonprofits are in survival mode to deliver critical programs, it's incredibly hard and lack of time and staffing, even in the most well-intentioned initiatives. So a lot of the times things start and then they have to stop because there are so many more things around service delivery that have to take priority and precedent. But still, this experience was invaluable, and I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion to delve into some of these issues more deeply, because it really did affirm that the data is no longer a nice to have. It is no longer a nice to have. I can't stress this enough. It is really the core to how we build programs, how we build funds for organizations, and how we serve and grow. But if we can simplify it like this prototype does, we could really create a pathway that's not just digital transformation, but long-term sustainability for our sector. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you. Some really great key messages there around, of course, data is no longer a nice to have. It is an imperative, and that it's not just about compliance. It really is about telling your story around equity and proving your impact. So thank you so much, Sampata. With that, let's transition into the panel discussion. Lots of great questions. The first, we'll start with data management, since that's kind of where we're at with the prototype. Let's talk about that. It emerged as one of the top priorities in both the research and in developing the prototype. Viet, we'll start with you. Why do you think that is?
It's a great question, right? And I think it recognizes a fairly fundamental fact that often gets ignored in these conversations. We often get told in these spaces that everyone needs to learn how to code. Everyone needs to learn AI. And our research just shows that this is, in fact, not true. Most of the times, the kind of skills that people need to function in businesses, but also nonprofit, isn't in these frontier areas. You do not need to know what deep learning is. You do not need to be able to code your own chatbot in order to actually find impact. It's in a much lower level of digital skills. And in fact, once we do the research, you realize that about 20% of job postings, and this is sort of in the nonprofit sector, ask for Microsoft Office, things like Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel. And you realize very quickly that this idea of data and data structuring and spreadsheet skills becomes really, really vital. Whether that be, let's say, managing your donor list, managing your service clients list through a CRM, or actually collecting data about service qualities, documenting processes. Everything actually comes down to your knowledge and usage of these spreadsheet tools. A spreadsheet tool like Excel doesn't actually tell you how to work with the data, how to make a budget, how to create Gantt charts, how to create a CRM. You also need all of these non-digital sort of knowledge, right, to layer on top of these digital tools. But we actually realize that essentially data and spreadsheet technology is a very versatile tool that almost every nonprofit organization currently uses and can in fact use and leverage to scale up and skill up their digital capacity. And so that is sort of what we found certainly in our research with the demand for different kinds of digital skills in the nonprofit sector, and ended up being something that we focused on.
Thank you. Max, anything to add there?
I think both that and part of how Sampath previously described it really covered it well, where it's this, I think there's an overwhelming understanding of the need to demonstrate impact without the sector necessarily having the tools to always being able to do so. I think that it's really moved past sort of an understanding of just counting individuals or ensuring that compliance is being met, to being able to tell that story of impact and also be able to use data to optimize our operations, just advance your mission by delivering things better. I think that in my experience, the sector has a really strong understanding of that need, a strong understanding of the point of what you need to do, otherwise called business intelligence, for example. But I think there's a part of a challenge of there being not enough investment in it necessarily. I think there's a funder-related issue in terms of there's an understanding within the sector of the need for it, but the resources aren't necessarily built to be able to do so. So I think there's a little bit of a gap emerging between the demand for strong data skills within nonprofits and exactly how they're supplied, exactly how organizations find the resources, find the folks to be able to build that up.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that and the role of funders and the role they have to play in this ecosystem. Sampath, over to you.
Yeah, I just echo what was previously said just now. You know, the landscape, the funding landscape is becoming so much more complex. It's incredibly competitive, and the best way to show impact, of course, is through data. And so, you know, when we talk about building equitable systems, we see what's happening, you know, globally right now in terms of polarization around, you know, topics such as immigration. How are you going to prove that this work is necessary, right? We can say, you know, I can sit here and say, oh, we've done really great, and we've, you know, I've seen this program and that program, but until you actually build the data to say, hey, you know what, as a result of our programs, as a result of what's happening within the sector, we've seen, you know, X amount of immigrants get jobs, sustainable jobs within their fields that they come from, you know, their home countries, or through our mental health supports, we were able to support X X amount of individuals, until we're able to actually frame it in that way, I think it's going to become increasingly challenging for us to prove, again, as I mentioned before, really prove around, why this work is really important. And everybody is under pressure right now, right? Funders are under pressure. Policymakers want outcomes, and we can't track or measure what we don't organize. So it is now the currency of credibility. It's how we tell our story and make decisions. And it's really the only way that organizations can move the dial in terms of their growth.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of challenges, we'll stay with you, Sampata. Based on the research and experience with testing these prototypes,
Yeah.
what are the biggest barriers? And a lot of them have already been mentioned in the conversation. Sampata, for you, though, I'm wondering, if you were not part of this pilot, how would you have prioritized this work?
To be honest, very, very challenging. I'm not sure, if I'm being honest, if it would have been prioritized. I think Skills for Change as an organization, we're very fortunate. We've made some investments in digital technology and staffing to support that right now. So we're able to move some of these pieces forward. But I think, time, staffing, and a huge part of this is also change management. We've been having a lot of conversations around change management, and just that, we moved from Google to Microsoft 365 last year, and having folks be able to really grasp what that shift was like, having, years and years of data in the sector be paper-based, to go from that to have to all of a sudden shift and have people's minds shift to like complete change management. And now everything is online, and tools and technologies that you may never have used before in your life. It is a process. It takes time, and it takes capacity, and it takes funding, and that those things don't come very easily. Viet, did you have something to add?
I wanted to sort of like hot pursuit on that point, right? Because I also think there is new emerging risk because of that transition. It used to be the case that sort of sensitive case files, let's say, that many of you deal with, would have been able to be secured by literally physically locking it into the file cabinet, and the only copy of it existing was in that physical thing. And so as long as that cabinet is secure, as long as that room at the building is secure, you would have been able to guarantee that privacy for many of your clients. And now you don't know where that data may be when you are forced to transition to this more digital platform where even this Zoom call, is being recorded. And so you also, through the forced adoption of these new tools, have all of these new security areas where you perhaps don't have the language to describe, which we also saw as extremely important in that consequence of these kinds of privacy violations or privacy incidents may have in organizations, which I think is another sort of like often understated thing about this sort of forced transition.
Completely. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's very funny because I was thinking about that, just like the pre-pandemic and just everybody having these digital files, or as you mentioned, me like putting files in your documents, even on your laptop or your computer, and person X leaves the organization, and so go the files as well, right? Like there's no way to kind of organize and store. So I think that security risk is becoming increasingly important. We're seeing a lot of our funders and partners really requesting that, making sure that even our policies and practices are up to date on cybersecurity and security measures in general. So I couldn't agree with you more around that. But I think that just going back to your initial kind of question, Wilfrida, I think if I hadn't done this project, where to start would have been the challenge. Right. Again, I think a lot of organizations think that it has to be a big shift in a CRM, or you have to like make these big changes. But I think what the prototype did allow is to say you can actually make a small change. You just need to kind of have you have to know what the end goal is, what the information you want to capture, and then you can start building piece by piece.
Thank you, Max. We want to give you a chance to weigh in on this question as well.
Yeah, I would just add a little bit, because I think both those responses covered it really well, right? Like there's one part where the number of capacities that nonprofits need just keeps increasing, right? Cybersecurity, previously didn't have to think that much about data security. Now you have to think about it. 10 years ago, we weren't all worried about like, what is our AI policy and how does it intersect with cybersecurity? Now, all of a sudden, it's these new, really advancing capacities that are needed that I think make implementing this tough. And then I think we've talked about the sort of resource and funding challenge, but I'd amplify what Sampata said about wayfinding. I think especially when organizations only have a small window of, we have this much to invest necessarily on digital capacity, want to get some training, follow an organizational sort of development initiative. It's a little bit of a scary and risky challenge to understand what do I go out and find, given there's so many things out there in the ecosystem for building digital capacity. So I think that wayfinding piece is a really important sort of blocker, part of the critical path to be able to actually, implement this kind of development.
So then let's help people find their way a little bit. Where do we start? Where do nonprofits start on this journey? And what is the role of funders and governments as part of it? Maybe we'll start with Viet this time.
Yeah, so this is actually a language that I don't think I've actually tested with any of you or even on the panel, but the way that I've started describing the impact of our project, right, is that we're working within the systemic constraints that organizations face. And so the kind of benefits I feel that many organizations will get from using our prototype, from consuming our research, it's unfortunately not going to be systemic changes, because our work doesn't relax any of those organizational constraints. It's about how to work in small increment, exactly, Amit, but like that marginal improvements, understanding what those constraints are. And if we are in fact looking for those sort of transformational changes, right, the conversation needs to be about relaxing what those constraints look like. And that includes, let's say, from a funder perspective, on funding formula and funding approaches that is focused on this idea of administrative efficiency, where the more the money that an organization spends on directly delivering program, as opposed to investing in their internal infrastructure being one of the key criteria in sort of considering organizational ratings, that likely is one place and that where those systemic change can come from. In terms of compensation, the reality continues to be that if you want to be able to invest in these top technical talent, the market pay is not the kind of pay that many nonprofit organizations can in fact afford. And so in fact, allowing the organizations to be able to invest in themselves from a funding perspective, from a pay perspective, will all contribute to this more systemic changes. While our sort of interventions through the prototypes that Blueprint has developed, even the research that we have shown, it's about understanding the constraints and working within those constraints.
Absolutely. I like that transformation, the playbook for transformation is in fact a series of small incremental changes that lead to that systemic change. So yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. Sampata, anything to add there?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that with organizations, in terms of where to start first, really is to get even one process right. So, you know that you need to report. So what does that pathway look like in order for you to report on those outcomes? So there's everything from intake, program delivery, outcomes equals reporting. So even if you can take like one piece of it and say, what is the data that we need to be able to just tell that story and be able to say what your outcomes were, I think that that's even enough. So again, it's really nonprofits understanding that it does take so much time to build enough that, like, in an ideal world, your whole systems were all speaking to each other and everybody was cross-trained, etc. But if you're able to take that one piece, and I'll be very honest with you, something that helped me in terms of the data inventory, there was a section of the project where I had to list the data inventory of what is the information that is necessary to tell the story. And through that exercise, I mean, I used AI tools to help me to understand what that is. So I think that, there are free AI tools that folks can use to really understand, okay, based on, my organization, based on, what we're doing, how do we utilize some of those tools to help build those data components. Just shifting to your other kind of secondary piece around what role do funders and governments need to play. Of course, like, any funder has to report on what the outcomes are, and that's also, it's cyclical, right? If you have good outcomes, you have an opportunity to build more programming, etc. And so I think, again, they should support the infrastructure of how that data is captured. So funding that's for capacity building, funding that's for data management systems are the best models of success, because you're investing in the program delivery components, but you're also ensuring that the appropriate data is captured. And where they can't fund, I think a lot of governments and funders need to have the systems available to say, this is the portal, these are the information that we need you to capture, and we'll walk you through that so that you're able to really ensure that we're capturing the right data that you need and that we need. And I also think just, because a lot of smaller organizations face capacity issues, a model of flexible funding that's tied to system strengthening and digital literacy would be really critical to have. And we are very fortunate, I think, due to the pandemic, there were a lot of grants that have come out nationally, provincially, federally, that do kind of speak to the capacity building, speak to capital grants. So I think that nonprofits need to look a little bit outside, if you haven't already, to see what's available from a grant perspective. Yes, it is competitive, but if you can get that first footing, and that's how we did it. We got the first footing with a capacity building grant that was just focused on digital technology, and that just allowed us our first step to take that. Then we could, really understand what the value was of that, and continue to build from there.
Thank you. And Max, over to you.
Yeah, I feel like the three of us are doing a lot of agreeing on stuff, which is probably good. Worked on the project together. So
We
I'll
love
just,
consensus.
I'll just,
maybe
yeah,
I should,
amplify.
maybe I
I
should
think
start disagreeing, just to
yeah.
stir the pot.
But I think I think to Sampada's point about funders, I think it was, I largely agree with that take. And I think that the one piece I would add is from the funder perspective, I think that more resources.
Max,
are always
I'm
really
sorry.
useful.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Our
Certainly.
interpreter is in the English channel. Could you please change to French? Just for the interpreter. I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, how do I change that channel?
No, you're okay, Max. It was the interpreter was speaking French in the English channel. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Yeah, no
Sorry
problem.
to interrupt.
No problem. So I think that more funding is always useful, like resources, just because it is a capacity piece. I do think that understandably funders are often constrained in terms of what can they provide for. So if not that, I think that one important move is the acknowledgement, at least, of data capacity as being a key thing, a good thing for delivery organizations to be investing in. And if funding can't be made available, at least funders having a role in that wayfinding and information finding process. I think that always attaching that with resources is important, but I think that funders can also take on leadership that isn't directly attached to money necessarily. And then in terms of how nonprofits get started, I do think the macro piece that I'd really emphasize is just focusing on strategy and mission and people over technology necessarily when starting these, just because I think that often, especially in the infrastructure right now, there's a lot of an incentive for companies to sell technology, largely to say that your problem as an organization will be solved with this CRM. I think that often that creates a lot of implementation challenges and a lot of complexity. And I think that a lot of the success we've ran into is organizations starting much more with how do we serve our clients? What is the best way from point A to point B that, say, uses data or uses technology? Then how do digital skills requirements end up stacking on that?
Great. So we start with small incremental changes, focus on reporting on your outcomes, and focus on strategy, mission, and people over technology. All great places to start. So our final question.
Wait, Freda, if I could
you
just
have more to
jump in.
add? Yeah. Yes, please.
One very quick thing on that, right, is one additional benefit of that approach that Max has laid out. Also recognize that a lot of digital tools just aren't designed for nonprofits in mind. Just because of the recognition of the shallow sort of revenue potential in the nonprofit space for these tech companies. And so a CRM, in fact, is a good example where a lot of nonprofits just cannot use off-the-shelf CRM products because there's so many different kinds of sort of interactions that happens, right? You need a CRM for your potential donors and funders, and then you perhaps need to use that same CRM, but in a different way to treat, let's say, your service clients and end users of the nonprofit. And so oftentimes what happens is a lot of technology is developed for private sector usages or industry usages that just cannot be used sort of like off the shelf, which then just underscores that key importance of the approach that Max laid out in the slide.
Mhm. Thank you. Great. So switching gears a little bit and thinking ahead, what comes next for the project specifically, and what are you doing to help organizations improve their digital skills going forward from this work? We'll start with you, Max.
Yeah, so there's a couple directions I think we're excited with for the project. The first is really around these prototypes and models. So I think we've spent a lot of time talking about the data capacity model we've piloted already. I think that one of the areas that we're really excited about is finding out how do we share that and scale it, right? Because our goal is really that's a model that organizations can relatively sort of use out of the box. They need relatively little outside help, outside resources, because that helps handle some of the challenges that we ran into in the process. So we've been really focused on figuring out, how do we share that? How do we get that out across many organizations across the country? And also consider some of the other prototypes we considered earlier in the process that I think tackle different types of digital challenges that organizations have in different ways. So being able to scale those is, I think, one of our big aspirations in terms of finding really concrete ways to build digital capacity across the sector. The other exciting direction I want to flag is sort of right at the top, Wilfrida, you flagged the Digital Skills Plus framework. So the skills framework that we sort of built to wrap around a lot of this project and mapping out what digital skills do nonprofits in particular need, which ones are most important. It's where it sort of speaks to that, what you just mentioned, Viet, in terms of where digital capacity is sort of different for nonprofits from maybe other sectors of the economy. So we built a framework around that in terms of mapping the digital capacities of nonprofits, mapping them to Canada's Skills for Success framework, and really trying to come up with practical definitions of what is a basic level of this skill, what is an advanced level, what does that look like in practice at a nonprofit. So we're also, over the course of the rest of the year, testing some tools for organizations to be able to adopt that framework a little bit more, understand where are my strengths, where are my gaps, where are my needs in this, and again, how do we use that as a wayfinding tool, sort of a map to the future of building up the digital capacity we think we need to accomplish our mission.
Mm-hmm. Great. Do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think I'll sort of talk broadly about where I hope this work is going, and perhaps a challenge to nonprofit sectors, because you obviously don't face enough challenges, as you are very much aware. But there's a real trade-off with these tools, right? The reality is, if your organization wants to invest in digital capacity, given the current constraints, that means you have to create dedicated time to invest in it. We have also seen cases where nonprofit wants to do this work and then ask their sort of downstream workers to just add that on top of their existing priorities without talking about the actual realities of trade-offs of the fact that many nonprofit workers are already pressed for time, is already pressed for capacity. And so my hope and the challenge for this existing phase of work is for organizations to also recognize that, hey, in order to do this properly, there does need to be dedicated time, and that might take away from your other priorities. And I just want to be sort of honest and upfront about that cost, because I think it's unfair for to sort of release this tool without being honest about that fact. Where this project is going and where I'm excited, right, is, and this was an intentional decision where when we started this, we intentionally didn't focus on AI, because a lot of the conversation in AI by that point was still nascent. And the risk there was we were just going to add to the noise by being speculative. And there's enough noise about AI that we're all listening and considering to. The world, I think, has changed since the 3 years ago when we conceptualized this project, where there is a bit more information. there is a bit more signal and there is a bit more analytical framework that allow us to incorporate AI into this project and how organizations should be thinking about AI. And so that's some of the work that we'll be sort of engaging on. We have already started the initial phases of it, that hopefully there'll be some interesting things to come out of it that help cut through much of the noise that we see in this area.
Yeah, great. And Sambata, the question's a little bit different for you, given your involvement in the prototype and the pilot. How do you intend to stay engaged in this work?
Yeah, I mean, I think both from an intention of staying engaged as well as what we can do collectively to move this forward is like I personally and as our organization very happy to stay engaged through working groups or through supporting kind of what train the trainer models might look like in order for like bigger adoption of this. But I think also critical to this is just for organizations and in order for organizations to get involved and be able to start at some point, as you mentioned, via like things that cost money and that you may have to allocate resources to is, you know, if you don't have certain things, there are we have to be more open as a sector to be able to share information sharing, right? If you, even something simple as your organization doesn't have a cybersecurity policy, who can you go and ask to have that kind of built out? Or are there organizations that can help support that process so you don't have to do everything yourself, that you may not have the skills or expertise in your organization nor the time for it? So I think, you know, reaching out to broader sector groups that, you know, organizations may be involved in to start building some of this is really critical. And I also think just general knowledge mobilization. So conferences and, you know, places that we can go to collectively to share this information and bring the lens of not just here is the prototype and here is how we can implement it, but also what are some of the challenges you're going to face around funding and around capacity, and how do you address those while you're working through the prototype? Because I think it's equally as important to understand some of those systemic issues while so that folks understand what challenges they may be up against and how they can kind of move through it.
Mm-hmm. That's encouraging. We can do more than one thing at a time. Great. So let's move over to the quick Q&A, and I will come back to you at the end for just some final thoughts, 30-second soundbite before we log off. But we have some questions, and we'll turn things over to you, the audience, who've upvoted them in the Q&A portion. Let's see. So the first question is, what digital skills are essential for fundraisers versus program delivery in prospect research today? And how can nonprofits build these skills in-house? I'll leave it up to you to decide who jumps in first on that one.
I suppose I can go, just given, you know, that's my area that I work in at my organization. I actually don't necessarily see in terms of digital skills it being different than program delivery. And I'll tell you why. You know, one thing we're recognizing is it's really critically important for us to align program delivery and what we're reporting on to be able to share with our funders. So I think in terms of the skill set, you still need to have fundraisers that can go out and sell your product or your service and sell to folks. So I don't think those communication skills, as much as, you know, AI may take over the world, I don't think that that is going to change for the foreseeable future, in that, you know, myself have to go and pitch to a funder, a prospective funder, why it's important to, you know, to fund our organization. I think in terms of some of the digital skills, trying to align some sort of like partner management framework, you know, in your digital skills. So like, you know, I know they have Razor's Edge, et cetera, all these ones that are focused on that. What we've been working through is there a system that could be potentially utilized for both, for program delivery as well as for funder management and funder engagement? So I think just those basic understanding of skills of how do I move a funder from, you know, prospect prospect to the next stage to the next stage in order to build that reporting of how we're working through with funders is really important. But I do see it as combined. I think I highly recommend and stress that you work with your program delivery teams in collaboration to understand what are those components that we need to be able to share in terms of storytelling to go to those prospective funders.
Great, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I might be upstaging Max here, where I think this is in fact literally the perfect use case for the prototype we had in fact created. Or Max and team at Blueprint has created, because step one of that sort of prototype, right, is literally a process mapping exercise where you go through, let's say, the process of prospect research. Who is involved? What action is being taken? And crucially, what data is being collected at every stage of this prospect research process. And through the process mapping, if you follow through our prototypes that will be released in a couple of weeks, to the actual guide and everything, there's a self-guided questionnaire that is part of this sort of like tool that then allow you to figure out places in which you can improve this. And so that is in fact the perfect use case that Angel had in fact brought up for the prototype, where I think in fact our prototype is made specifically for those kinds of things.
Yeah, I won't try to beat that sales pitch. But I do think it's true, right? Because I think it's a contextual problem that differs organization to organization. So I don't think there's any one simple solution. But I think to your point, Viet, right? The prototype is supposed to respond to that. And so much of prospect research is a data problem where you need to understand what is your process and what you particularly need to bring to the table. So I definitely agree.
If I can just add, 100% agree. I was looking at the inventory last night. I was preparing for this, and because again, I am on the partner side, but exactly what you said, like everything I listed out in terms of the inventory was based on what program delivery needs to show me in order to show the funder. So it was really using those both lenses in order to be able to understand what is the data we need to capture. So it is really the perfect exercise for you to know, go to your program teams to say, this is the information we need to capture. And then this is how we sell that information to those prospective funders.
And it really is built as a standalone tool. So you can pick this up as a nonprofit today, read through the steps, follow them step by step, and still get the results that are intended. So that's fantastic. Now, what are effective ways to showcase impact digitally to corporate partners in a way that supports engagement?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is in fact a space in which, in a weird way, I have a lot of direct experience in through delivering these kind of conversations, right? Start always with, again, the message that you want to be delivering. But then actually understand the modality and the specific way in which you're communicating it well for each of the various different channels that you're doing it in. I'll give an example. LinkedIn posts, which I think was an example in the question, right? That is where you can essentially have sort of short to medium thought pieces, a couple of up to 3 paragraphs where you can give a tiny bit more detail into some of these thoughts. That might be different if you continue to be, let's say, on Twitter or Blue Sky, where you're limited to a couple of sentences. And so each of the platforms and each of these ways, YouTube Shorts, TikTok, all of these have very different engagement style, have very different languages. And you have to be able to cater the language you use for these platforms differently. And so you might ask, okay, how do I cater these languages to fit with the platform? You look towards those people who are in fact engaging on those platforms and engaging quite successfully. Bonus points, especially if those people in fact are present on multiple different platforms. You might find organizations that exist both on LinkedIn and Instagram at the same time, that you'll be able to in fact look at the different styles that they in fact post on those 2 platforms and realize the same message that they're trying to convey in those different formats, and you'll be able to take learnings from that.
Thank you. Sampath, anything to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. But just putting my marketing hat on, lots of conversations that we're having with my team is around how are you sharing your story? Again, it goes back to the stories. It's great to put your program information online, but we do see more engagement when we are sharing the success story. So I would strongly recommend that. Like, again, one like very little data process that you could build in. If you can't build in anything else, is tell your program delivery team to collect the success stories and impact stories throughout the program. And all you need is just, one little form or something just saying that they're approving of you using their messaging. And that can create such a beautiful story to tell. Even if you're able to share on social media just a few key data points around what your program is doing and how they're engaging, it can make a world of a difference. And I agree with Viet in terms of how do you promote to different platforms is really important. So knowing your audiences is going to be the first key step. Like, we know that more younger people are on Instagram. So how are we promoting our youth programs primarily on Instagram as opposed to maybe, what the focus is on LinkedIn, who's using Facebook? So really understand your audience, get that information firsthand from your clientele, and you will be able to kind of then modify how you're sharing stories and how you're engaging in different platforms.
Fantastic. Max, last word to you on this question.
Viet and Sampath have me like totally outmatched in terms of strategic communications. I'm gonna leave it at that. That was great.
I probably would have done the same. Well done. So that wraps up the Q&A. Before we wrap up, I do want to give you one last opportunity to leave this audience. The time has flown by really quickly, but to leave just one final thought to take away, one thing that they can do coming out of this session. And we'll start with Max.
Yeah, I'd say definitely look at the materials. I think our microsite for this is hosted on Cinder's site. Is that correct, Wilfrida? I forget exactly where
Yes.
keeping all the materials right now. Yeah. So like, I think looking at the prototype, like if it seems like it makes sense to you, looking at some of the reporting, we got a little bit dense in it, but I think it provides a lot of context for the type of initiative as well as some practical tools. Because I'm excited about how we've managed to strike the balance between making things that are useful and making things that are accessible. So if you've got the opportunity to look at it, very grateful, and thank you everyone for being here today.
Yeah, what about you?
Yeah. This might be silly, but don't expect after going through the prototype for it to solve all the problems that exist at your organization. It will not. But what I really do hope it does, right, is it prompts you to think about the problem of sort of digital upskilling as something that doesn't start with technology. It starts with what you actually want to achieve as an organization. It's very easy in these conversations to start with a tool. You see a new technology being released, and your first instinct goes to, how can I use this technology in my organization? Where in fact, for these initiatives to be successful, you have to be grounded with what you want to achieve as an organization, and then figure out the technologies that currently exist to solve that problem. And you might find in that process that the technology you need is not the new shiny tool that was released yesterday. It might be a tool that might have existed for a decade ago that might have escaped your radar. It might very well be Microsoft Excel that have existed for decades, but you're not going to reach there unless you start by focusing on what your organization wants to achieve. So that's, again, something I want to leave with all of you here.
Yes, and Sampath?
Yeah, I agree with the comments already being made, but I think organizations need to look at what their strategic vision is and then align everything towards that. So if you are looking for growth in your organization, then you know that that there may be some investments that you have to make and figure out those ways. But I do think that organizations that just are keen on building capacity, data capacity, stay informed, keep engaged, keep coming to workshops like this, get involved, be the first on the list for when the prototype becomes available more broadly, do all of those things. But I also think build your volunteer management system, go out to schools and find out who's doing placements, who have, students who have expertise in this area. If you can't afford to pay staff, build, your volunteer base that can help support some of these areas. So I think there are multiple ways that we can kind of action these that, again, don't look at this as big and overwhelming and something that is just not doable. Just take bit by bit, piece by piece, and I think it can be very, very actionable, especially if you get engaged and put your list on the prototype.
Yeah. It's a great place to close off. Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of the conversation, and what a conversation it was. To our panelists, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. Thank you for all of the work that you've put into this research, whether it be from the perspective of a piloting organization like Skills for Change, or from the researcher's perspective. We appreciate all the work that you've done. To the audience, thank you for being here, taking the time out of your busy days to engage with us. We're excited to share, as Max, I think, alluded to, the project has been extended, and that the next phase will bring more practical tools to support you in implementing and digesting this great research. So if you haven't already done so, please join the Cinder mailing list. We will put the link in the chat. Follow us on LinkedIn, keep an eye on the socials to see how the project is progressing. And again, thank you for being here. This will be recorded and it will be shared by email. So yes, that's it for us today, everyone. Thank you so much.